Hi there, everybody. Mark Ellis. I'm an indirect tax partner at BDO, and I've only got 6 slides today. You'll be pleased to know. And there's some. They basically summarise the key questions I've been getting from clients as they relate to sales from the UK that are being exported to the EU 27 member states. Not to the EEA or rest of world. That's what I'm going to cover today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to start with, I'm going to cover some basic principles, and they're quite important because this is where most of the questions that I get come around. So the first one is around customs duty. Which is if you've classified your goods properly, then you'll have a customs duty rate that you'll know, and that applies across the EU, the EU 27 member states. Whereas VAT is not the same. So each country doesn't just have its own VAT rate, it has its own VAT rates, plural. So it can depend on what product you're selling to which, and which country it's going into. So I've put a link there, and I always send this to people. This is the European Commission. They do a note each year, which is pretty good. Sometimes it gets out of date, particularly when there are things like temporary VAT rate reductions in countries as a result of the pandemic. But this link here I always refer to as a starting point as to what is the current VAT rate in that country on that product. And I think another key concept here is that this is something that you may need to think about in terms of your products, as in how much VAT would be due, maybe payable by you, maybe payable by your customer, but expecting a freight forwarder to work that out for you is probably a bit much, and that you need to be aware of this stuff. So another key concept that goes on that's talked to a lot with people, and this has always been the case. It's just more prevalent now for UK businesses. We used to advise US and Chinese, etc., businesses on this. Because of the way the EU is formed, because it's a bunch of countries. Ireland's probably the exception, but across the rest of the EU, you see this a lot, which is the country of import. It can either be, and it's a selection process here. It's an either or. You can do whichever one you want if goods are moving from the point of entry country, as I refer to it, which is typically France for a lot of road transportation. It doesn't have to be. And the end of the journey country, which you do see this a lot with goods that are moving on to Poland and places like that, where you go, well, yes, it entered in France, but then moved on to Poland. And there's a choice here. And again, this is something that freight forwarders need instruction on. They're not here to make decisions for you. You need to be armed to have that discussion with them of where you are requiring them to import these goods as they do the import declaration. And the last point here, which is I think the most important one, because a lot of people are saying, well, we want to pay the VAT, import VAT, and they want to pay the duty. The key thing to note here is that, when you have an import declaration, whoever's named on there, and I've put these phrases down, importer of record, declarant, and you see other phrases used, but whoever that entity's name is or that person's name is, they're liable for the import duties, which includes import VAT as well. So breaking it apart, not possible, I'm afraid. And that's a key concept as we move on to some of the other stuff. Next slide, please. Thank you. Really key point here, and we've seen that articles on this in the press. There are 2 types of customer. So there's the one who's VAT registered. You have business customers, wholesalers, etc. in the EU. And then we've got other types of customers, private individuals, but also there could be charities or whatever that aren't VAT registered in their own right. So with the first kind, if the customer is the importer of record on that declaration, so they're liable for any EU duty, and they're also liable for any import VAT because they go hand in hand, they should be able, to pay it and reclaim it, subject to their own rules. Depends on what they're doing, but if they're if it's goods, hopefully by and large, they could also reclaim that import VAT as well, because they're the declarants, because they're noted on the import declaration accordingly. That's how it should work. And this is where the tensions come a lot recently. I want to pay the duty, but they want to pay the import VAT because the VAT registered. It's just not going to work that way. You can't split that. It's going to go. They've got to go hand in hand, because import VAT is an import duty, for want of a better word. And then we move on to other types of customers where the import VAT is just, it's another cost. It's just like the duty. And again, this isn't about being VAT registered. It's about, I suppose, transparency. So you see this most with retail sales, and those are the stories that have made the press. It was a surprise to me, the customer says, that I got a bill for, import VAT and duty. And I think most people can, live with an extra cost if they're informed about it up front. And that's where most of the discussions I've had with people is about, well, better communication with them about these additional costs and what they might be. And again, that links back to, if you're going to communicate to a customer what better communication about import VAT that they may end up suffering, either because you want to collect it from them, or because they will get a note from a text from the freight forwarder. Then it would be nice if you could actually work out what that should be for them. And that means some knowledge at your end of what VAT rates are in different countries for different products. The last point here is, it would have been really nice if this had gone on schedule of 1 January. It would have been fortuitous. But unfortunately, it's been delayed to 1 July 2021. There'll be an option, subject to any further delays on this implementation, where e-tailers, sending effectively goods into the EU, so we can see the value there. It's less than £150 per consignment. So that's not all retail sales. It'll be some of them, but they would have an option then to just pay, to register and pay through this import one-stop shop their import VAT on all these supplies. Otherwise, the default will be, as you say, it'll just be a normal import with duty and VAT payable by whoever the importer is. So this is a simplification. It won't be mandatory. It'll be available and should hopefully help a lot of retailers who sell low-value goods to streamline their compliance on VAT across Europe. Next slide, please. A lot of questions around these kind of principles, as I call them. If I get any questions at the end saying what's going on in Poland or France, I'm probably going to pass on some of those because we need to check, and these are evolving as different tax authorities form their views. So having a fiscal representative, that means effectively a guarantor for you to be VAT registered in a country. Most EU member states, we're finding out, are turning around and saying no. Even ones that have indicated that they would say, yes, you need one as a UK a business who's not established in the EU. Most of them are now turning around and saying no. But you need to check on each country whether you'd need that. A lot of countries were already having what you've just heard about, postponed VAT accounting. They already had it. So UK and Ireland were quite late to the party here. So many other member states allow this. Germany doesn't, for example, allow this. They still want it paid up front and recovered. So again, it's worth checking in that particular country that you may be worried that your business customer might be very upset about import VAT, but it might not faze them at all because they just put it through the VAT return, like you've just heard for yourselves in the UK, and it might not be any big deal at all, especially if you've got a zero customs duty rate because of your particular product or because it was made in the UK. If you took away the duty and the import VAT is not a problem for them, they just put it through the VAT return form, then they might not care about being named as on the import declaration as the importer. The last one there as well I've talked about is if you're registering for VAT in another EU country, that's usually because and I'll cover those situations in a bit. You've probably got stocks of goods sat somewhere, a warehouse sending them out from stock of goods you've got in a particular country, and it's just to imagine that it's not just the VAT return. You're probably going to have to file an EC sales list in that country as well, and Intrastat declarations for arrivals and dispatches from that particular location in that EU country. So it's not just VAT, it'll be the other stuff that you've probably been used to date in the UK that go with intra-EU trade. Next slide, please. So we talked about this before. I've tried to put everything on here that people say, I've heard of this, I've heard of this. VAT onward supply relief, Customs Procedure 42, Article 143 of the EU VAT Directive. What does it all mean? This is a relief that that can be used to not have to pay import VAT in the country in which you've imported it, and we see this used the most at the point of entry countries. So you see it in the Netherlands and other places like that. That's where it gets used the most. It can be used in any country, but it is used the most in those countries because they want to import in that country the goods, but we don't want to have to think about any import VAT being paid and then reclaimed. Instead, you switch that import VAT obligation into what you've been used to before 31 December, which is acquisition VAT. But you do need an EU VAT registration at the end of the journey, which can be your customers, EU VAT number, or it might be yours because you're registered for VAT in that other country because you've got a stock of goods there that you're adding stuff to. I've spoken to quite a few people about this. It has less attraction where you pay your import VAT and reclaim it on your VAT return form in that country. Why on earth do I need to do this? Because if I'm paying import VAT, it doesn't cost me anything, and it's pretty easy to do. So, I've seen it used with Germany. Because again, you have to pay it and then reclaim it the old way of doing things in the UK. So it's quite attractive if goods come into Germany and then go on to another country in the EU. And the last point there is that some freight forwarders they will as part of their remit of services, they will also act as a tax representative. You hear that bandied around, which is that they will handle this for you, and all they really want from you is your customer's VAT registration number in the country that the goods will move on to, and that's what they want from you. So if you hear this stuff bandied around, it's sometimes it's a good idea. Other times it's just it's not really needed, I don't think, and it's nothing to be feared. But hopefully, if a freight forwarder is talking this to you, this hopefully helps you understand what this is about. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Another question get asked a lot is about Intra-EU Movements, where we've got a UK company involved. So a lot of people were in the UK. Used the triangulation simplification, where they had movements as I've described in the first bullet point. And then a lot of them are worried now that there's a problem and they can't use it going forward. And that's right on the face of it, but the way the EU VAT rules work, and have always worked, was to basically say that the intermediary needs to register in the for VAT in the destination country. And the triangulation, if you wanted to use it, it's always optional, that you would, I would take away that need to do so through the use of triangulation. So what we've seen with most businesses is you've got these kind of transactions going on now. These are the first ones after 1st of January that the UK company is involved in. The UK company gets itself registered for VAT in the destination member state, and once it's got that VAT number there, then it now has an EU VAT number. So if there are any other EU intra-EU supplies there after that point, they don't have to keep registering for VAT in the member state of destination, and I've called it member state 4 in my bottom example. They now have an EU VAT registration number they can give to the EU suppliers in those other examples. So yes, it's another VAT return to do. Yes, there's an EC sales list, but it's more administration rather than costs. That's a good thing. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Again, this is where we see the real reason that you need to VAT register, apart from the one I've just mentioned with triangulation, which is more from a reporting perspective. This is where your own goods are moving into the EU. So I've put in the heading where I see it most. Now, I'll talk about DDP briefly, but this is where I see it the most, which is they are definitely my own goods. As they cross the border, I haven't sold them to anybody, because they're going to be, I'm leasing them to somebody, I've got a stock of goods that's sat at a customer's site, or it's my own warehouse, or I'm sending them to a processor in another EU member state, who maybe will send them back to me, or once they're finished being processed, I'll send them somewhere else. So they're definitely not being sold as they're being imported into the EU. They're your goods still. And this is where you definitely need a VAT registration. And you would have done, one of the biggest surprises to a lot of clients I've spoken to is they've gone, where did this come from? And I'm like, well, you should have been registered for VAT in whichever member states it was probably 6 years ago when you started doing this, because you were moving your own goods into that country, and under the single market rules, you should have been registered for that. It's just that the position has now been crystallized and clarified for all to see, because there's now a hard border and an export and an import declaration. It's really come to view now. So you've been getting it wrong for quite a few years. And I think, and that's a key thing for people. A lot of people will be going, why do I need to register for that? I'd say, well, you probably should have, some circumstances, you probably should have registered in that country a good few years ago if you've been building up, stocks or sending your own goods to be processed. The difficulty here is there's no sale. And that's what we all look to for the value of the export and the import. So there are rules there, and I've put HMRC's own guidance at the bottom there, which is identical to what goes on across the EU. It's the same rules, but basically it says you do have to come up with a value for that, for that movement of what is your own goods into the EU. You had that obligation beforehand, single market, when you were moving your own goods from, say, UK to, say, Germany, for example. But I don't want to say this in a way that things were lax, but it wasn't as strictly policed what value you used for your VAT returns and interest and so on. Whereas now, obviously, it's going on two sets of customs declarations, an export and an import declaration. So much more scrutiny on this, particularly if there's EU customs duty due, then that's a hard tax now. So much more focused on what that value actually is. So that's where we see the biggest requirement at the moment for EU VAT registrations, and it's more real. My parting comments around DDP, a lot of people have said, I'm selling DDP, and therefore that means I have to be the importer in the EU. I'm going to say something controversial here, which is that customs rules, Incoterms, and VAT rules are not aligned. So VAT law says one thing about when a supply happens and goods change hands from a VAT perspective, their ownership. Customs says something different because that's around who's the exporter and who's the importer. And DDP and Ex Works, basically just abbreviations that sum up who's liable for what costs and who's responsible for it, which is an indication of things as they're going on, but isn't necessarily the full story. So I'd resist the urge to say, because it's DDP, that means this. Not necessarily the case. And actually, it may be that actually your customer is the importer into the EU and is quite happy to be the importer. And if that means changing an Incoterm to say, delivered at place or something else to keep freight forwarders happy that that it works, then maybe that's what you should think about doing, because the alternative to saying it's your own goods going into the EU, even though you're selling it to a customer, is everything that's on this slide. You're giving yourself a lot of headaches here that maybe you don't necessarily need to have, and you're presuming your customer would be upset by things, and they might not be. So always check it out. That's the end of my slides. Very happy to take questions.
Okay, so we've got a question here. We've been told by our freight forwarders they can't handle a shipment from our Netherlands warehouse to outside the EU, for example, Morocco, when we're quoting our GB company and our Netherlands EORI on the declaration. They say we have to use a Netherlands registered company entity. Is this correct? And does it apply for all non-EU shipments?
Okay, this is a question we get a lot. I'm going to see how many of these are VAT questions. This is a customs duty question. This is for who's going to be named as the exporter, and you can be named as an exporter on an export declaration. This is EU customs law, and this is around saying that an exporter from the EU needs to be established in the EU. So that's what this is driving this, and we see this quite a bit.
Thank you. Question which is slightly lengthy, but hoping you stick with.
Please tell me it's VAT, not customs duty. Go on.
I believe so. We are VAT registered in Holland.
Right.
Have EU EORI number. We ship goods to a warehouse in Holland and import using our own details. From there, our goods can be sent to EU customers in any EU country. However, no sale takes place. Our goods are rental goods and remain in our ownership. We may invoice a central customer in a different location anywhere in the world, not necessarily the location the goods are shipped to. The goods eventually return to the UK for recalibration and processing to get them ready for the next rental. How do we account for VAT in this scenario?
That's a project in itself there. Some general principles here around services. So services and VAT, when you're leasing goods like that, if it's two businesses, I'll assume it is. I'll assume it's not private customers. Then you look to where your customer is based. So usually that'll be no Dutch VAT and reverse charge German VAT from the German customer, and you move. If you've got use and enjoyment, there's a wonderful phrase that's somewhere different outside of the EU. That can change things. Moving goods around that you own to different countries. That does cause problems because as we've said before, you need to value those goods. You need to pay some import VAT when you go into a certain country on those goods. Thankfully, if they're coming back to the UK, I'd like to think the person who's asked this question, a company is UK VAT registered, and that wouldn't be a problem. But yeah, it's situations like that where there is. I'd love there to be in a straightforward. Yes, it's ABC, but that needs quite a few things, a mapping of what's going on, and then each one will have its own answer.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Our customer in Spain has insisted we supply them on a DDP Incoterm basis. As a UK company, if we're registered for EU VAT in one of the countries in the EU, for instance, Germany, can we still supply our customer based in Spain using the German VAT number we have? Also, how do we account for the VAT in Spain and in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the key things we see EU customers saying, sell to me DDP, because they don't want the hassle of it all. And this is why it's worth checking. If there's zero duty on it, so there's no cost associated with it, and all there is import VAT and your customer's VAT registered, then it needs communication. And I've been on calls with customers and tell them to climb down from the cliff. It's not that bad. It's just like importing something from the US or somewhere else, which they're used to doing already, because there is zero duty cost. And they account for their import VAT on their VAT return form and recover it. So what's the problem? And if that's possible, then that's the best solution. None of this, I'm the importer of my own goods into the EU, because that's just a headache. If goods go in to you, make use of the German VAT number, the goods would have to go to Germany. And then they would have to go from Germany to Spain. If the goods go directly into Spain from the UK, then the German VAT number is not going to help you if you're moving your own goods into Spain. You're going to need a Spanish VAT number. So what I've said to most clients is push back and challenge EU customers just saying, I want DDP, you take care of everything. Because sometimes they've got a point. Other times they really are just, there's no reasonable grounds for them being worried about things. And they already import goods from people who are really outside the EU, and it's not a problem.
Perfect. Next question. I promise this one is slightly shorter than the last one. Hi, we import work into the UK from the Republic of Ireland to undergo a process, which are then returned to the Republic following the process. Are we able to be named as the importer of record, even though we do not have ownership of the goods?
You can always be named as the importer of record, but doesn't mean you necessarily get to recover the import VAT. So there were two HMRC briefs in recent years that have clarified HMRC's view on this, which is only the owner of the goods is entitled to recover the import VAT paid on them. So anybody can pay the import VAT on the goods, but who can recover them? So in this situation, for you to say that they're my goods and I'm just a processor, I don't own them, I think you've got an import VAT cost there. You won't be able to recover it on your VAT return. Well, I'll rephrase that. If you do, you're making an error, and that may be picked up on a VAT compliance inspection.
Thank you.
So next question. This is a company that's purchasing from the EU, but it's not actually importing the goods into the UK. They're going directly to the company's customers in other countries. So how this is going to affect the VAT return?
Yeah, this is the situation I discussed on the slide I was just talking about Intra-EU Movements. That was my fifth slide. If you're intervening as a non-EU company in Intra-EU Movements, that usually necessitates a VAT registration in the EU, probably in the destination country, but if you want to, in the country where you buy the goods. US companies and Far East companies have been being surprised by that for many, many years. And UK companies have now joined that boat, which is, it's the goods are moving from one EU country to another or being bought and sold in the same EU country. Well, I've given myself an EU VAT registration obligation. So that's just the way VAT works.
Perfect. Next question. I believe you did touch on this on your slides, but if I was to export a good into the EU for processing and then re-export it from the EU member state into another EU member state, where would I be liable to pay VAT?
Should be. I've got a client who's in exactly this scenario, and this is the one I mentioned, who said we've realised they should have been registered in 6 member states from about 9 years ago, because they're moving their own goods over to member states. They should have been VAT registered to record the arrivals in those member states and record them on a VAT return in that member state. And then they were sending those goods on to other member states and to customers in the same member state. So that should have all been, it was all reported on the wrong VAT return and Intra-Eu form, the UK one. It should have been reported on German ones and French ones. And that's exactly the situation that's going on here. There's no getting around it unless you're transferring ownership and selling to somebody, which you can do, but that's a change to commercial arrangements, which some clients are doing now. They're saying, I'm not going to send my own goods for processing. I'm going to sell them at this price to the processor. And then the processor is going to add their value, and then it'll be, I don't know, sold back to me or sold on to another customer, just so that they can deal with the import VAT and the VAT accounting properly. And it was, I say, before 31 December, it was being done wrong as well. But nobody focused on it. Nobody had picked it up during a compliance inspection.
This one is going back to actually the German VAT, Spanish VAT. Just how do you register for VAT in Spain, please?
Okay, so I'll move on to the US for a second. I guess questions about sales tax. Each state in the US has a portal. Has its own website, and it says this is how if you want to register as a foreign person for sales tax, do so here. It's pretty much the same across the EU. Many countries have got English versions of the websites because they're making it more open for people in the US or whoever else to access it. Norway does this, Switzerland does this. So most times it's just logging on the portal and saying, well, I need to register for VAT in your country. The countries where it is only in their local language, obviously you've got a problem if you don't speak that language and you haven't got anybody available who does. And that's where people go to local country representatives, somebody like, an accountancy firm that's there, or they might have a subsidiary that's there, or a freight forwarder, or somebody who can help them get registered for that in that country because of the foreign language blocker. But most of the countries, I say, it's in English, so you just need to go on to whichever countries it is, tax authority website. And again, it's all listed on the European Commission's website. It's a really good website to find stuff. Designed deliberately so for people across the world, businesses across the world to access and register for VAT or wherever they need to.
That's perfect. Maybe the last question, considering time, but if I was to export goods from the UK into an EU member state that doesn't use postponed VAT accounting, would then I be liable to pay upon import?
Yes.
There's no other way of getting around that?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that probably is all we've actually got time for today. So thank you, first of all, to all of our speakers for picking this subject for us. Very helpful and enlightening. Our next session is Monday, the 1st of March, again at noon, and we'll look at product labelling in our new relationship with the EU. My colleague Aaron is posting the joining link in the chat now, so if you can take the opportunity to click on that, we look forward to seeing you then. And thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.